Welcome to the High Impact Medicine podcast. In each episode of this series, we talk to a medical professional who is pursuing what they consider to be an impactful career, alongside or learning from previous clinical practice. Today we are speaking with David Basset, who finished medical school in New Zealand, shifted his career towards consulting for a few years, before returning to train in radiology. He shares some advice that would be useful for doctors and medical students who are trying to figure out whether consulting would be a good fit for them. We also discuss the benefits of combining business experience with clinical practice. I found this conversation insightful, so I hope you enjoy. So welcome, David.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Excited to chat with you and share my thoughts with your audience.
Great. So first I'd like to know, how was your experience in medical school and what led you to seeking out these opportunities in consulting?
Well, I think firstly, I really enjoyed medical school. I've always found the science fascinating. I think compared to other degrees, there's a really personal kind of culture with the specific cohort through medical school. You get to know a set of peers really, really well. And that's something I really valued. But I think going through, I realized that as much as I found the science fascinating and helping individual patients fascinating, I've always, I think, been attracted to the systems behind that. And I think I found myself questioning what could be done to make things better at a larger, more leveraged scale compared to my peers. And I think many people during medical school have some kind of thought process that goes like that, particularly when you're in a hospital and you're seeing challenges to patient care and realizing that there's a finite limit to how much you can do clinically compared to if you can change the system as a whole, how much greater a leverage and impact that can bring. And for me, that led to exploring a number of different ways of kind of changing the system and helping to improve that. I got involved with the Medical Students Association, became more interested in health policy, but then discovered management consulting as a way of potentially taking my experience and knowledge and being able to work at kind of systems across a broad range of industries. And yeah, I managed to get an internship there, then a graduate job with EY and then BCG, and was able to have some wonderful experiences there that really cemented my opinion that it's an excellent career for medical graduates in general. Certainly added a lot to my career. I'm now back working in clinical medicine again, but it's definitely been a very valuable part of my career. And I think no matter what people do afterwards, I'd highly recommend it to all medical graduates.
So what did you find the work and the culture to be like in consulting?
In many ways, I actually think it's very similar to medicine, which is not something that people would kind of assume at first. It might be helpful if I explain a little of what the work is like. Typically, you're in kind of a small project-based team, which is working for one client. So, for example, a number of more junior analysts, where I worked at BCG, they're called associates or consultants, but the names differ between different firms. And then you're working with a manager and a partner who's overseeing the project, normally working at quite a senior level on the client side on a project of strategic importance to that organization. And that lends itself to very intense kind of high pressure work with rapidly moving deadlines and ability to kind of have a significant amount of impact over a project of maybe 4 to 12 weeks in length. And I think some of the things that people sometimes find challenging about medicine are also challenging about consulting. You can have long hours, high pressure, significant responsibility. But that also means there's a number of significant benefits that are also similar to medicine in many ways. You can have a significant impact and a significant amount of responsibility, even when you're relatively junior in your career. I know for me, I was having to analyze significant, you're working with clients which are looking to spend a very large amount of money or make very significant changes to their businesses based off your analysis in your first year of work, which can be quite intimidating. In many ways similar to what it's like for an intern doctor in terms of that level of responsibility you feel. I think the culture is extremely supportive in a lot of these firms compared to the more hierarchical model of medicine. And I was really struck when I went there that you can call the partners there by their first names. It's that they're really interested in your thoughts. I think compared to medicine, where there's a very established evidence base that really rewards seniority, whereas in management consulting, when you're dealing with a new problem that no one in the business knows what to do with, and hence they've actually brought an external consultancy in, people really value fresh ideas that no one's thought of before. And I think that brings kind of a democratic nature to the firm. People hear out your case, even on your first day of work, if you can make a good case. And I think that's really rewarding. And I think something that a lot of people in medicine, would find quite shockingly new compared to some of our clinical jobs at points.
And from your experience, what were sort of the most valuable skills that you gained?
In many ways, it's almost like a finishing school for skills and experiences you've developed elsewhere. So it's about taking that raw analytical skills that I think many people have and distilling it into a way of telling a story to people that allows decision makers to make important decisions. So, for example, you could take a set of data relating to something that's happening in an organization, interviews with a large number of people, then distill the key insights from that and pitch it in a way that the decision makers in that organization will want to digest that information. And you're ultimately there as an advisor, but you're essentially guiding them towards the decision that you believe is best. And I think that's an extremely valuable skill set that is valuable in virtually every industry. There's a lot of senior decision makers who are very fatigued in terms of the number of decisions they have to make day to day to day. And if you're able to have that skill to provide them the information in a way that they understand, that can lead to a tremendous amount of influence. And actually, I think a lot of the skills we learn in medical school around empathizing with people, understanding the kind of the cycle of change and what leads people to make the decisions they do is actually tremendously helpful when married with kind of an understanding of how to analyze data and some basic business concepts to help us be really effective in a consulting type scenario where we're influencing decision makers.
And how do you think medical students or doctors could best position themselves to get a job in this field?
I suppose on a kind of a purely administrative level, most of these companies have annual recruitment drives and will recruit on campus for that. And it's any kind of experience you can show that you can have that shows you've got some initiative, that you've done something involved with business in the past is really, really useful. If you've been involved with the Medical Students Association, if you've done a business case competition whilst at university or something else, those things are really useful, as well as any role where you can clearly demonstrate you've had a significant amount of responsibility or led a project. Those types of things are really useful. And then having a referral into the organization is really helpful. A lot of these companies will be flooded with a large number of CVs from primarily business graduates who are looking for a job. But if you can get to know someone on the inside, whether it's a friend of a friend or someone that you've cold messaged on LinkedIn and then developed a relationship with over time, that's extremely valuable for getting your foot in the door and differentiating yourself from other candidates. I think the other important thing to do is to make sure that it's definitely a role you want to go for. Very much like medicine, I think consulting is one of those things that has a lot of kind of extrinsic factors that pull people towards it. There's a certain amount of prestige, there's a certain amount of pay, which can entice people in. And while those things are really good, I think it's also important that people take a step back and make sure that that's truly the right fit for them as opposed to just a good role in general.
What type of person do you think would be a good fit for management consulting?
The kind of person I think would do really well in consulting is someone who's really energized about the big picture. They're constantly thinking and reading in their own time about big picture issues. They're someone who enjoys leading a team, and I think that also involves the stress of managing different people's expectations over time. Some people are naturally drawn to that, while I think other people can do it, but they don't so much get the energy from it. And I think it's really important to introspect on which of those types of people you are. I think also someone who's adept at seeing kind of the politics within organizations. Management consulting is about change, and whenever there's change, there's going to be politics. Some people really thrive with that and kind of intuitively understand it. Other people find it more challenging. And I think on top of that, there's also some basic skills, as you're able to read on most of these companies' websites, around being quantitatively minded, being able to structure information in a rigorous way, that type of thing. I would say those latter things are skills that can be learned a lot more, but I think that natural inclination towards enjoying dealing with systems and change are probably more intrinsic traits that it's really important people introspect on.
And you said you were interested in policy while you were in medical school. What pushed you away from pursuing that as a career?
I think policy is something I'm still really fascinated by. And I think in my experience, I was actually able to get involved in a few policy things. I think tractability, though, is a really important thing to think about. Um, at certain points, there's windows where in each organization or country where policy changes are possible, and then a lot can change. And I think if you see one of those windows, jumping into some kind of policy role, whether it's advocacy or in government, is a great thing to do. But there's other times where policy just is probably not going to change. And I think in those times, the private sector and companies offer another avenue for change that doesn't require kind of the extrinsic political process. And if you find yourself in the right place, you'll be able to, essentially produce change without the external environment having to align so perfectly.
Yeah. You've taken your experience and you've come back to training. So you're now a chief medical officer. How do you plan to take your learning forward in your career? And
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think for many people who do medicine and then go into consulting, there's a decision point that comes about where do they see their career in the long term? Is it in clinical medicine, or is it going forward with primarily a non-clinical career? I think for me, I really enjoyed my time in consulting, but it actually also made me reflect on how much I enjoyed clinical medicine too. And I think it's one of those things where I realized the benefits of both. And I think long term, I've got interest in both. And now my plans going forward are I'm going to be training in radiology. And my eventual aim is to work in AI in radiology. There's a lot of exciting startup companies in this space, and I'd love to take both my clinical medical training and some experience on the business side with management consulting, and to work for one of those companies where there's a need for people who have skills on both the business side and the technology side and the clinical medicine side. And I think for people who are interested in that type of thing, and essentially any way of marrying the business and organizational side with medicine, there's a huge amount of opportunity there. And I think this is again where I think reflecting on what gives you energy and what gives you enjoyment over the long term is really, really important. Careers can be long, we can be working from 20, 25 to potentially with health advances, into our 70s at this point. And I think there's really differential impacts to making sure that you're in something that gives you the kind of the most energy for the long term, the greatest personal fit. And I think for me, reflecting, I realized that combining clinical medicine with business is really what gives me the most passion and the most energy, and I think is the, the most sustainable basis on which to build a long career. So for me, I think it makes sense to continue medical training, but for other people, they might say it would also make complete sense to carry on, leverage their medical degree and continue down a fully non-clinical pathway. Again, I think reflecting on the type of person you are is really, really helpful in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think that AI in radiology is a particularly important problem to tackle?
So yeah, radiology and AI applied to it, I think is really important for a number of reasons. First is the sheer volume of medical imaging is growing and growing and growing, and the importance of that to clinical medicine is enormous. So I think anything we can do to increase the efficiency of medical care is something that's potentially highly scalable, and which I think is very exciting. Secondly, I think from a more long-termist perspective, healthcare and specifically radiology offer really important test cases for how we're going to apply AI safely in the future. Specifically talking about topics of interpretability and understandability, I think if we can develop regulatory norms around how those things are operationalized in healthcare, because I think there's some very strong incentives within the healthcare infrastructure and regulatory frameworks already that would drive a focus on those things that could potentially offer a framework for applying things like interpretability and alignment in other areas where we're going to be introducing AI. I'm not necessarily sure a large proportion of the EA community should be working on this topic, but I've definitely got a hypothesis that a number of people should be trying to experiment in the field and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. So for our listeners who aren't familiar with EA, that is effective altruism. And my next question is, how has effective altruism shaped your thinking about your career?
Yeah, the language of EA can be a little bit strange sometimes for those who haven't heard of it. Essentially, the philosophy of EA is very much centered around the concept of utilitarianism and how to do the most good for the most number of people, and thinking about what problems are most neglected, and therefore, how much impact can you as an individual person have in that area, and how much potential impact would that have, having you putting your effort into that field compared to something else. And I think for me, that's hugely shaped my career focus. In the EA community, being a medical doctor is actually one of kind of the stereotypical examples of potentially how people think they're having a big impact, but may not be having as big an impact as they can do. To paraphrase this loosely, just because so many other people want to be doctors, that if one doctor would be removed, someone else would probably fill that spot. And I think at first that can be quite challenging for us in medicine, because we've worked so hard to get where we are, that it can be really challenging to realize, like, goodness, maybe this isn't the most effective thing for me to be doing. But I think once you swallow that kind of slightly difficult realization, it does really free you to think about a larger number of other opportunities that might seem less obvious. One example is global health and pandemic preparedness. I think this is a great field that in the effective altruism community is talked a lot about, preventing a pandemic like COVID or even worse, that I think a huge number of medical graduates would really be able to make a big impact in, as well as things like global health and various other fields. There's a lot of competition in medicine for some of the more prestigious routes, things like surgery and the like, whereas for many of these other fields, there's really not much competition at all. There's a huge need for medically trained people to go into these fields. So I personally think it's really encouraging and exciting to hear about these other opportunities that could make a huge difference. I would encourage everyone to think more seriously about it, whether you call it formally effective altruism or just a useful framework.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to a younger you, say maybe 5, 6 years younger?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I think, firstly, if you're still at university, really enjoy your time. It's a wonderful time to experiment that you really won't get again. I would say take as many risks as you can early on. If you want to start something, if you want to do something speculative, now's the perfect time to do it. Try and get as many experiences as possible and really deeply reflect on each one and think more about what really gives you energy in life. I think most people who've made it into medical school are going to be talented and smart and hardworking and able to actually succeed in a very large number of things. And their challenge is not figuring out what they can do, but narrowing down a very large number of possibilities. And I think there's actually very few people who enjoy a very large number of things if they're honest with themselves. And I think if you can really find the small number of things that give you the most energy compared to that probably relatively larger group of things that you somewhat enjoy and just happen to be quite good at. If you can find that small group and really focus on them, that's the basis for an excellent career. Combining that with the effective altruism principles that we've talked about to help narrow down exactly what's the best thing to work on, I think that's the grounds for a really fertile career.
That's extremely inspiring. I like that. And just before we finish off our conversation, is there any sort of resources you'd like to recommend, maybe books or other stuff you found useful in your journey?
Yeah. So I think we've talked a little bit about effective altruism. I'd highly recommend the 80,000 Hours website. I'm sure we can probably put a link to it in the comments. That's an effective altruism resource that has a number of great frameworks for helping people work through different career options and thinking about various kind of high priority pathways as well, like pandemic preparedness that we've talked about. For those interested in management consulting, firstly, I'd really encourage you to reach out to anyone that you know who's in the field and just have a private discussion with them directly. If you do decide that you are keen to apply, there's a couple of great resources out there. One is a book called Case in Point, which has a great number of resources for how to prepare for management consulting interviews. Other than that, I think personal conversations with people in a career path a few years ahead of you are always wonderful too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today.
It was a pleasure.